Welcome back. This is barn renovation day 2. We've been doing things, minutes here in and out, but we spent a good amount of time on this Saturday getting stuff done. So we're going to go in, show you today some of the stuff that's still going on, and today's kind of education is we're going to show you how to wire up a light switch. Stay with us. Thanks for watching. Well, we're back in the room. We're cutting out plumbing, all this copper, whatever this laminate sheet is. We got to get all that out. We're getting close to getting all the insulation out. There's water damage at the bottom, so we're going to have to kind of evaluate the studs that are in here. We may have to rip out some walls that I didn't want to rip out in order to replace them. The floor is not treated wood. Anytime you build a wall, for instance over here, build a wall on concrete, the floor joist, the 2x4 that lays on the concrete or gets screwed to the concrete, either with a nail gun or a Tapcon nail screw, that 2x4 has to be treated because it's going to pull moisture from the concrete over years and be rotting out, which is like this. This is not treated and it's all rotted now. So don't do that. Make sure if you're going to build a wall somewhere on concrete, you're using treated boards correctly. We're going to get all this ripped out. We're still cleaning in here. Continuing on, and I told you I would teach you something in each video session. Try some kind of skill. And so today I am going to talk about wiring a light switch. It's probably one of the easiest electrical things you can do. Light switches are very common. And so I'll hit some of in this next section, I'll hit some of the purchases. I'll hit some of the the rough end wiring, and then the final wiring all at the same time, whether it's a pole barn structure or a home structure. So let's get started. Lights. Okay, so we are at our light switch, and we're gonna have lights in this area. Doesn't matter where you're at, whatever room it is, you have a light switch that goes to a light. You flip the light switch, light comes on. So when I do a rough end stud wiring, I do things a little bit different. I'm a little bit tedious. I like my wires to be flat. There's some code things here, and you definitely need to check code. It's different everywhere. So county by county, codes are different, and the inspectors are different. And so if you don't know your inspector, if you don't know an electrician that you can ping ideas off of, if you've never had an inspection done, it's good to have that. I will tell you that if you screw up, like an inspection costs me $65 here for an electrical inspection. If I screw up, the worst that can happen is he come out and say this and this and this is wrong, and I have to pay him another $65 to come back another time after I fix everything. So it's better to know, but it could cost you $65 and how much ever time and material it takes to fix what he found wrong. But here, some of the commons and some of the, if you're not getting inspected, things that I think you should do. First off, for a light, we use 14-2 wire. You can use, which is white, typically white Romex wire at Home Depot and Lowe's. 14 is the gauge, the diameter of the wire. And since this doesn't hold a lot of power, it's usually a 15 amp breaker back at your breaker panel. You can use a smaller wire, but which is actually a larger gauge. The number is larger. So it's typically white. So that's the first thing for lights. I use white. Now, if you use 12 gauge, which is yellow, you can use 12 gauge. But if you have 12 gauge going to a 20 amp circuit breaker, you need to have a 20 amp switch to hold the power load. So if you're going to use 15 like is recommended by me, you can use white, 15 amp breaker, typical standard 15 amp switches. So that's important. That's the first thing. Second thing is when you're running these wires, stapling them in. Here the code is I have to have my first staple within 6 inches of my box, my junction box, and then it should be about every 12 to 16 inches from there on out. And so on a stud frame home, so on your exterior walls especially, but interior is just as important, you want these wires to be in the center of the stud. Mainly because if you're building a house, on the outside of this will be the plywood or the OSB for your vinyl siding or whatever siding you're doing. On the inside is going to be your drywall, and you're going to have drywall screws. So if they miss the stud, you don't want your screws hitting this wire. It will cause a short, and then you'll be all ticked off that this one light keeps shorting out. And so it should be in the center. On a pole barn structure, I recommend, kind of like I'm doing here, putting them as far this way as I can get them, because I have this 1.5 inch gap, and no screws will be, from the metal, will be hitting this. And so for the pole barn structure, I put them a little farther that way. So every light switch typically has 3 wires going to it. You have the power in, which is power coming from my breaker panel over to this switch. It's the main power circuit going into the switch. And then you have, of course, the wire going out to your light. So that's the first 2, the main 2. The third one typically is a power out. So I don't have to run a new wire from my breaker panel to every switch. I can go from this switch to the next switch with power, meaning I can have power stretched from this to the next, and it will not affect. This light switch does not have to be on for that one to work. It's just, I'm just absorbing power from here. It's my main power wire, goes from switch box to switch box to switch box. But it is important to know that, because the way you wire the switch later will determine how you wire it. Because if you get the hots on opposite poles, then the light out there will not work unless this one is also on. So I'll teach you that later. But mainly, you need to know there's 3 wires coming in. I prefer to leave my Romex coating on my wire, and I write on here. So just the way I write it, I like in, out, and light. That's typically the way I'll do it. And so I have my in, that's my power into this box from my breaker panel. And then I have my light, that is the power going to the actual light that is going to light up. And then I have my out, which is my power going out of this box to my next breaker box. So that is the 3 wires that I have, the in, the out, and the light. Sometimes on the in, I'll write a big P for power. And then this would be rough in. So if you're building a house, you rough it in like this, you curl all these up and you jam them in the box, and you wait for drywall guy to come. And once drywall comes and he covers this up, you can no longer see, oh no, which one of those was hot? Which one went to where? I don't remember. But when you pull them out, it's wrote on it, and you can do that. Some guys like tape systems, which I understand that, because I've had my drywall guys fling a little bit too much mud and cover over my writing from time to time. So they'll put black around the power in, and they'll put a yellow that goes to the light and red going out, or whatever color system they want to use. I've seen guys do that as well. Whatever you got to do to mark it, you just need to know when you can't see the wires and you can't trace where they're going, when the drywall or the internal whatever paneling or whatever you're using is up, you need to know what these 3 wires go to later when we go to wire in the switch. Very important. One important note is that this switch is only one switch for one light. So if you are doing a kitchen and you have a switch on this side of the room and a switch on that side of the room that works one light, which is a pretty common thing in a house, or if I wanted to be able to turn the light on here and walk out that side of my shop and turn it off, that is a very different setup. And I will do a video on that, but today is just a simple setup, typically like your bedrooms or essentially a bathroom. Power comes in, you have one switch that turns the light on and off, and that's it. And so that is this setup. It's a very different, understand it's very different, and it's a different wire even to wire up 2 switches or 3 switches. They call that a 2-way, a 3-way, 4-way, whatever, how many switches you got. It's very different. So understand that today. I'm only showing you the one switch, one light. If you're building a pole barn, a shop, whatever you would be building, whatever, and you're just going to leave this open, there's not going to be any insulation in inner wall. Obviously, you can go ahead and do the whole wiring job today. And so for the sake of this, and because I want these lights to work prior to plywall, whatever I'm going to use as walls in here, this is going to eventually be drywall. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to wire this up, but this is not the way that I would be doing this. Just so you're aware, on a home or something, typically I would do all the rough in, get all the interior walls up or drywall or whatever, and then I'd come back and rewire this. So understand that. So like I said, we're going to pretend like our walls are on, and we're going to come back and wire this up. And to show you, because it's hard inside this box, we're going to talk about how you strip this wire. I've seen 3 or 4 different ways to do this. I have my preferred method. I don't like any of this sheeting, the Romex sheathing, to be in my box. It clogs the box up. And so this wire will come through the box. Let's say the box head is here and this wire sticks out. And so you kind of have to reach up in there. And I'll show you when I'm doing it. You're just not going to see it very well. So if this wire is sticking out of my box, the way I prefer to do it is to reach up in there and slice long ways, peeling this back, and then I'll pull hard on the rubber, and then I'll take and I'll cut it off. And so that's the way I prefer to do it, showing all 3 wires. A trick that an electrician showed me, I still don't use it because I don't like it as much, but what he does is he slices here and he slices here, and then he just jerks, and this whole sleeve will come off and it will basically rip. And so you're going to cut here and here and slip it off. They do make tools that you slide over this and you pull through and it slices it and you can peel it off and cut it. Those are handy as well. And then I've also seen electricians that will cut this before they feed it into the box. And I don't like that. Those kind of guys, that I've seen guys cut this stuff and write on it and then slide it over it, or they'll tape cut their color systems on the actual wire versus on the Romex itself, this Romex coating. And so it's all in how you want to mark it, all goes back into that, but you're going to have to take this off. And so what we're going to do, and this is very hard to show when I'm not doing, it's not in the box. So I put a little slit in it all the way down. And you don't want to dig too deep. You don't want to cut into the wires. And so there's this paper wrapping in there. So if you don't cut through the paper, you've done a good job. You don't really need to cut that deep, except for down here at this last inch. And you can cut deeper just to make sure it cuts through. If you just kind of score it, and then you get to here, you can actually rip on your score all the way up. And so then you'll get this, and then you rip your paper off, and then this will be tied into my wall, and then I'll take and just cut this plastic off. And now this is what's going to show. So I've got a black, a white, and a ground or a copper looking wire, an uncoated wire. So my black is my hot, my white is my neutral or traveler, whatever you want to say, and the ground is actually the ground. Another trick that I do that I didn't talk about is these boxes, they have little holes in them that you knock out. Some of them have like kind of flex where you just poke them with a screwdriver and then you can fish the line down through it and it doesn't actually break the tab out. Some of them you just jab with a screwdriver and it breaks that tab out. But as you know, a junction box has holes in them. Another trick that I do, so that if I forget or the drywallers get crazy with their mud and they mud over my writing, is there are 2 that will come out against my stud. So this one and this one here came out down this line against my stud. I always make sure that my in and my out go tight against my stud, and then my light is the one away from the stud. So if I'm wiring up, that helps me to just go ahead and know, okay, he messed up, or they got me dirty and my lighting, my signals got messed up. But I can look up in there now and say, okay, I know this one's the light, and I'll show you it doesn't even really matter at this point as long as those 2 in and out go on the same screw of my switch. But that's another trick I use to help me know which wire goes to which without turning the breaker on and testing hots and trying to find them later. Okay, so we're set up. Drywall's here, right? Can't see in there. We know from my tricks that they were labeled. I knew exactly which wire I had. If I couldn't, I could look up in there and see which hole I put it through. Once I strip, I fold my wires a certain way, remembering which one is which. Now, I use this wire low that came in low as hot because it was already here. I don't typically do that. I typically go everything down. I don't typically bring anything up low, just my standard. But I know this is my hot, and so it's going to go down. My light out my power out goes in the first hole, and I put it to the left. And then my light was in my second hole, and I put it to my right, okay? So now I've got my wires separated, and I know which is which. I always start with the ground. Doesn't matter what you do. It's just my way, just my method, just my process, and I'm going to show you why. So I need to go get a sleeve. This next part is just part of our code here. but it has come common practice with me. Nobody is coming to inspect this because it's an old grandfathered barn, but these are copper sleeves. And so you can buy them in different sizes. This smaller size is meant to hold 3 wires. And I have 3 sizes of these that I keep all the time. They're not expensive, but what you're gonna do is you're gonna crimp one of these sleeves around the ground wires, which I start with my grounds, and then you need a special set of pliers. And so this plier right here has this little notch in it where I will crimp my sleeve. And so I have this set of pliers in my electrical bucket just for sleeves. And so what I'm gonna do next is take and pull all 3 ground wires out of this mix, and then I'm gonna twist them together, make sure they're all connected together, and then I'm gonna put one of these sleeves over it and then crimp it down and then cut. I only need 1 ground wire to go to my switch, but I want all my ground wires connected together in my wall. So I'm gonna crimp them together and then cut, leaving 1 to go to my switch. And I'll show you that when I'm done doing it. I've got my ground wire. I took all 3 wires, twisted them together, and I'm not sure how good you can see this in this light, but what I've done is I've put my sleeve on, I've crimped it down, and then I've cut the 2 extra wires, the 2 extra ground wires, about 1 inch outside the sleeve, and then I folded them up over top of the sleeve and squashed them down. Another pair of pliers that I like, and this is an old set I've had forever, is the wide fronted flat wires. And these are good for twisting wires together and making them tight. But I have 1 ground wire left that will go to my switch. The rest are tied together and crimped together that I will push back into this box. Next, I'm gonna do my whites. And so my whites are my neutrals. And on a switch, which is different than an outlet, that's the big thing. On a switch, they all just get tied together. So essentially the same exact thing that I did to my ground, I'm gonna do with my whites. I'm gonna twist all 3 together. I'm gonna strip the end and then put a wire nut. And then I'm gonna tape the wire nut down to the whites. So the trick, my trick with the whites, the more white wire you have sticking out, the more you're gonna have to jam into this box. Okay, so 1, buy deep boxes, spend the extra 20 cents and buy a bigger box, a deeper box. Don't buy the cheapest ones. But 2, don't leave a bunch stick out. You don't want to have to fold this thing 3 times to jam it back in there. So I cut them pretty short, then I twist them tight, or I may twist them first and then cut them so that they're straight. And then I'll strip all 3 and then put my wire nut on, and that's where I'll come back to you. Okay, so my whites are now tied together with a wire nut, taped around. I fold it in half and tuck it back in there as far back in as I can get. Now I have my ground that'll go to my switch, and I have 3 black wires, my in, my out, and my light, okay? So the important part here is that the in and the out go to the same screw. So what I'm gonna do to make sure that happens is I'm gonna go ahead and twist them a couple times right now together, just get a couple loops so I know that those 2 are my in and my out, and they always go together. Now, I don't have them marked, I just twisted them together. I don't even know which one's my in now. It doesn't matter though, because they both go to my 1 screw, the same screw. So they're both gonna be, one's gonna be hot, and then one, when it hits the screw, will be hot going to my next switch. So these go on the lower screw, and it doesn't matter, it's just my process. I always put the hots on the lower screw, and then this one goes on the upper screw to the switch. And so I'll show you that in a second, but what I'm gonna do is cut these about the same length, and then I'm gonna strip in about 3/4 of an inch back, strip my wire, and make a circle. And I'll show you that when I'm done with that. Okay, so I have the wire stripped. Not sure how well you can see it. This one has a little loop in it. These are just out. One thing I wanted to mention is that my screws or my loops always go up from the bottom up. And the reason being is that is way the screw will tighten. So as I tighten my screw in my switch, my loops essentially get tighter around the switch. If I did them the other way, as I was tightening the screw, it will loosen that loop up, and so it'll pop off. So just my process again, a little tedious. I'm gonna put my tip of my stripping pliers on the end. And one thing I will say is that throughout the years, I have just learned that tools make a huge difference. These are Milwaukee strippers, wire strippers. These are about twice the cost of those normal Home Depot and Lowe's brands, whatever it would be. And some of those Cobalts and some of the other brands, Craftsman, have come along and made a better one like this. Go ahead and spend the money. This tool lasts a long time. Get a good set. Do not buy a cheap set of wire strippers. These are the best. This is my second pair. My first pair lasted me 20 years. So it's worth it to have a good set. They will last you a long time. So got my wire stripped, got my circles turned up. Now I'm gonna go get my switch. Okay, I have my switch. I've got it set to off. That is not really particular because my breaker is always off, but I do this as a process to know it has to point down. You wanna flip up to on and down for off. And if you mess it up, you can take these screws out and just simply twist it in your box and it'll be correct. I've messed them up before, it happens. But start it correct and you'll pay attention. So I've got 2 screws, basically an in and an out. When it's off, this screw will be hot because it has power coming into it, but this switch has no current. When I flip the switch on, it allows current to flow through my switch, out this screw, into my one that'll be the light. That's important to know, which this is very elementary, of course, this whole video is, but my power in and my power out will go on this screw. So even if the switch is off, because both the in and the out are tied to this screw, both of those are hot. The only power that will then be dead is my wire that goes to my light. Very important. So we're gonna take this, we're gonna put my in and my out on my screw. You should never have more than 2 wires on a screw. Does that mean I've never done it? No, I'm just telling you to do better than me. It's happened before, but you shouldn't. So I put those loops around and then I will take and pull my wires tight. I like to make my hoops tighter than they should be. And then one thing that I have started doing, and as I get older, is I started using this for my screws instead of a screwdriver. You do a bunch of outlets or a bunch of switches in one day, and your wrist will start hurting, little carpal tunnel action, whatever. So I started using this. Do not crank. So I hope you heard it was just a 1 click with my hammer drill. Do not crank these things down tight. You will bust them. These switches are just plastic. So get my last one. Now this is my light out that goes on the top one. I'm gonna crimp my loop and then take my drill. That's all the tighter it needs to be, as long as it's in there tight. The last thing is the ground, and then I will go through and show you the lights. Okay, so we have it wired in and out on the bottom screw, my light out, the wire that goes to my light on the top, my switch is down for off. You can see the loops curled this way. So as I tightened this screw in, it made my loop tighter. And I said I typically always go bottom to top, but it's important to know which way your switch is before you make those loops. Because right here on my ground wire, which is very hard to see because of the lighting, but the screw is on this side. So to tighten it, I'm going clockwise this way. So my loop has to come from top to bottom. So as I tighten it, my loop gets tighter. That's it. We've wired our switch. We push everything back in the box. Next thing is to fold these in and then put our screw into our box and we are done. Okay, so we're gonna continue on, pulling old wires out, putting new wires in. One big mistake I've noticed is this is all 14 gauge wiring and they had it running to outlets as well. So all the wiring is getting jerked out. I am reusing some of the lighting wiring if I can find where it goes, but basically we're pulling it all out. We have a huge pile of mess of wire here that we're just pulling out. So we're gonna continue on with this. I hope this video helped you. That was very long, very blah, 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 lots of information, very elementary. So if you're experienced wire and you just like to see how I do it, I'm sorry that you had to hear all that. But if you're new to this and you want to know how to do it, that should have been very informative. If you have any questions, comment and I will make sure I answer those for you. There are lots of other good electrician videos on YouTube, I will tell you. But that is how I wire a switch. My boxes look neat. My wiring is flat. One thing I want to show you. As I'm putting my wiring in and nailing it in, I prefer these little plastic wire staples, clamps, okay? So I prefer these over the traditional, cheaper wire, old school wire staple. That's all metal. I've had better luck with these. Things look neater with these. I have not pierced wires as, you know, I've pierced wires before with the old style. I haven't pierced wires with these, but there's pros and cons. These have little teeny, like small thin gauge nails, and they can bend over and they get annoying sometimes. They can break, but I've had way better luck, and I feel like these are safer for wiring. And so that's what I use. It looks a lot nicer. They do make deeper ones. Do not try to take one of these small clamps and put 4 wires behind it. If you've got 4 wires that you got to stack, they make a deeper one that goes on that. So make sure you're buying the right ones. These are fairly cheap at Lowe's and Home Depot. So as far as equipment goes, there you go. There's your equipment bonus of the day, what you should buy. I think this is the best situation. And don't buy just a little baggie of them. You use way more than you think. Go ahead and buy a big one. They don't go bad. They don't rot. So stick them in your electric box. You'll have them for a life if you're just doing small projects around the house, but they're there. So some tools today. Power drills, don't crank down if you're going to use that. If you're not using a Phillips head screwdriver, buy yourself a Milwaukee or a Klein is also another good brand, a good brand wire stripper, and then the plastic wire staples that I've showed you there. There's your tool recommendations for the day on that. Hope that video helped. I will tell you, I used a standard 15 amp switch. Make sure if you're using heavier gauge wire or if your breaker panel, if you're going back to a 20 amp breaker, you must buy 20 amp compatible switches. So hope that video helped you on the one switch. I will do a double. I have one spot here where we'll have a 3-way switch with 2 switches that go to one light. I will show you how to wire that. It does take a different wire. It does take a different switch. So make sure you're aware of that. This is totally different from that. Thanks for watching. I'll continue on with this project and we'll keep you updated as we go along.